Lovely. Hello, 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 beautiful YouTube peoples. Today we will be, well, last time we were here, I believe that Englander read Genesis 6 to all of you and gave you his thoughts about it. Unfortunately, I had to duck out because my dog needed some urgent attention. Uh, I believe that the particular reason why was, I think that we had some guests visiting that day. The family of 10 that came to visit my family of 8. I told you about them before, Englander, didn't I?
Yes, the completely rammed house.
Yes. Although luckily what's it? Open plan houses are usually not very pleasant.
Mm.
Well, having the kitchen, dining room, and living room sort of combined into one, big 800 square foot space is rather convenient when you've got 16 people, not 16, 18 people in one building.
Yeah, and
Admittedly, though, most of them were children under the age of 12, so
you were
they
on
they didn't take up all that much space.
mass production of pizzas, were you? Was that
Oh, yes. The eldest daughter of this family actually helped me make the dough earlier in the
Oh.
day just because she rather likes it. She rather likes baking and things, and
Mm.
she does not mind getting her hands all sticky quite so much as I do. So basically, what we did was I measured out all the ingredients, and then she mixed them together, and then I kneaded them because
Yeah.
she was slightly out of practice. So she was like, "Oh, how do you knead pizza dough? Is it different from kneading bread dough?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, a little bit, because it's supposed to be flat, so you knead it slightly more than you need bread dough."
Yeah. And they're visiting recently. They visited recently, didn't they, as well? Um
Yeah, they visited yesterday.
oh,
Well,
yesterday.
yesterday actually is when we had all those pizzas.
Ah, that was more successful than the previous visit with the dog incident.
Yes, my dog did not lash out and bite any small children today.
That's good. But
Okay.
obviously, in your dog's defense, it
He's
was
usually he's usually It was a little girl that had been chasing him in circles around the entire house about an hour before.
yeah.
And she did approach him from behind when he was curled up in a ball, sort of exhausted on the floor,
Mm.
trying to like hide himself from all the little gremlins.
Yeah, you should have just taken the dog upstairs or something.
I haven't gotten
Oh,
upstairs.
do you not? Oh,
No,
the
it's
bungalow.
yeah, well, I suppose that's the style of house you'd call it. Yeah, it's like 1,500 square feet, but it's
Mm.
completely spread out. Only one floor, no basement, no upstairs, no downstairs.
Hmm. That's Is that very common over in your neck of the woods?
Uh, it wasn't. We could have gotten a two-story house, but well, my parents basically counted as a stroke of good luck that they opted out of that because it would have only cost slightly more. I think it would have only been an additional $500 or $600
Yeah.
for the, like 100,000 we had to spend on the house. And of course, that's a mortgage, so that's all over time, etc.
Well, I guess in
But
America as well,
well,
you've got the space for it, haven't you, for these huge bungalows?
yes, yes. Also, is the other bit of trouble with the house is, of course, is we bought it new built. We bought the lot on which the house would be built before it even had a foundation.
Mm.
It was basically just an empty lot of clay when we bought it. Didn't even have grass on it.
Mm.
Uh, the asphalt for the neighborhood had barely was like still fresh and sort of stinky when my parents bought the lot for the house.
Mm. I mean, you should perhaps your next, seeing as you move around so regularly, you should just buy a plot of land and help build the house yourself.
That is rather my parents' plan. Is we
Mm.
want to buy like a great family estate somewhere, and well, land around here is not terribly expensive. A good 90 acres. Uh, so like occasionally you'll see like a farm be selling off like maybe a whole field or just part of a field, and you'll see like between 100 and between 20 and 100 acres go up for nearly the same price as a new house in a suburb. For like $100,000 or less.
Yeah. And obviously, in
So
comparison to
yeah.
the same amount of land over here would be, I'm sure, very expensive.
I'm pretty sure that even what's it like? I've actually got a book all about homesteading, and it was written by a guy who lived in the UK, or who was born in the UK, I believe. And well, because of that, it describes basically two main sizes of farm. Is it describes a 1 acre farm and a 5 acre farm, because those are the only sizes that a middle class family in the UK could reasonably afford.
Yeah.
Whereas in America, no, you can buy land in some states for almost $1,000 an acre, which is about £600.
Yeah. There was um there was actually a sort of some farmland that went up for sale recently around not too far from where I live, and I think that was about 40 acres, but they never said what the price was. It was next to this sort of huge
Uh,
patch of land next to this river. Um,
yeah.
but
Well,
that's
probably got bought up by a housing development, didn't it?
I wouldn't be surprised, yeah. But to be fair, it
Uh,
was kind of right next to a river, so I'd imagine you need a few. There's probably quite a high flood risk for that.
well, yeah, and also is well, if it's by the river, that's then a waterfront property. It is actually like a bit expensive and valuable because people like the scenery, especially if there's woods on the opposite side of the river.
Yeah, I suppose you would still have to, you know, develop the sort of defences to stop the water from uh, flooding into the
Offenses,
houses.
what you do is like now I do realize that housing in the UK is probably rather different than it is in America. But in America, what you would do, it's very similar to what they do in some regions of Australia, like where they get the, 'cause in Australia you've got the bush habitat, and that's like a giant swamp for 6 months out of the year, and then it's a bone-dry desert for the other 6 months.
Mm,
And it's like what they do is they just build up the house on stilts that is above the maximum water level in 100 years.
mm.
I imagine you would just want to do the same thing in the UK. It's like, oh, how much has this river flooded in the past 100 years? And just build the house at that height.
Yeah, I suppose so. That's
Okay.
I don't know if it would work um, for this little
It wouldn't work
patch of
for a
land.
mass development, but it
Mm,
would work for if you wanted to try like build a slightly luxury house like a summer home for a rich person on
mm.
a large piece of land. I figured that you could probably like try and make some avant-garde thing on stilts by the waterfront. That could quite possibly that could be a profitable
It could
use of
sell,
land.
yeah, it could sell for quite a large amount, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, should we crack on with the reading?
Yes, we should probably get on to the good old Holy Bible. So where were we last week? Or
Genesis
not last week,
6.
earlier this week. Genesis 6. I believe that you read it out to the audience,
Yes.
and right, because I was saying before, is that's when I had to take care of the dog. That's how the whole tangent of this conversation got started. Okay.
And do you want to read
So
through it again, or should we just crack on talking about it?
well, I suppose that I would like to. Let me see. Yeah. I suppose we might as well. I suppose is why don't you just tell me your thoughts on it, and I can just tell you what I think of that.
Okay. Um.
What I understand might be slightly redundant for you to repeat your thoughts. Maybe I should have watched that episode of the podcast before doing this,
No,
but
that's fine. I just need to kind of pick up from where I left off, I suppose, if I can remember it.
well, that's fine. I'll just read through silently, and
Okay.
once I get to the end, I suppose because this isn't a very long chapter anyway. But once I'm finished with that, and we can just edit out the long pause of dead air.
Mm. Well, this is the yeah. This is we were reading through the arc, weren't we? So it's talking about um
Well, the beginning of that
yeah.
section, yes.
You know, when he was selecting every.
Oh yes, the limit, 120 years. I think
Mhm.
that might have yes, science in the Earth in those days. Uh,
Oh yeah, I remember talking about that. As like the
yes, and basically,
Numenorians, we're relating it to this sort of Tolkien lore, weren't we?
and of course is well. You ever heard what Edward Dutton has said about that? Is he thinks the reason why there's like multiple different mythologies where we have like a great giants and like higher civilizations in the ancient days that were destroyed by some kind of a flood, partially brought on by wrongdoing, which triggered the wrath of the gods. In most mythologies,
Mm.
uh, usually it's just that humanity annoyed the gods in some way. Anyway, as I was saying though, is basically is like you ever notice how like the more advanced technology gets, the less sort of remains in the ruins. Like plastic crumbles fairly quickly over time, uh, and metal rusts away in a matter of years, etc.
Well, plastic tends to be the thing that, at least what that we're told, lasts for thousands of years.
Microplastics last the longest amount of time, yes,
But you can't
but
really see
the
it, I
solid
suppose.
structure,
Yeah,
yeah, the recognizable structure doesn't last so long.
and that's one of
Uh,
the biggest things that I think my grandparents told me is that they always mentioned how things today aren't built to last and that sort of thing, and in a way that is correct. You see like the kind of it's the oldest things that tend to kind of endure the most, whereas we keep buying new things and these new things tend to sort of pack up within
it's like I was talking about my house earlier. It's
mm,
like the house that I live in. It's a typical American house. It's not even got. Is it like an older wooden house like you might find in Europe or in an older part of America, like in the Midwest, like 100-year-old wooden house. It'd be solid wood. It'd
mm,
almost be like logs. You'd have a very firm skeleton with all wood on the outside and all wood on the inside. But modern wooden houses aren't even made mostly out of wood. They've just got a wooden skeleton, and then the exterior is all plastic, and the interior is all plaster.
mm. And how long
Yeah,
and what
and the
condition?
insulation is all like made from like glass wool or plastic based, or there's a million different things, but yeah.
Mm. Yeah, well, I
Oh, but
suppose
yeah.
it's just it's unsurprising really when companies tend to kind of build the cheapest possible thing in order to cater for the largest amount of people. It's just the natural
Well,
progression of.
it's that, but it's partially like the American assumption of innovation is also part of the thing. Like
Mm,
Americans almost sort of what's it? We assume that something better will be about in a few years, or at most a few decades time. So we don't even necessarily want to build something to last because sort of what's the point, you know?
Mm,
If there's going to be like some kind of all new advanced air conditioning unit or a fancy new home convenience 100 years from now, why bother building a house that'll last that long when that'll just
yeah.
make it so difficult to install? Might as well build a shabby house that'd be demolished in 20 years so that it can be replaced with the newest nicest thing.
Yeah. And you tend to find as well that
There's an assumption that suburban spaces eventually evolve into urban spaces, and
mm, well, you tend to find that with the economies as well of so the general economies of Western countries now. It's more sort of we can what's the whole idea of deficit spending and that sort of thing? It's we can spend as much as we like now, and kind of kick the can down the road for the amount of problems we'll have later on. You know, it's kind of enjoy what we have now to but sacrifice the long term at the same time. You know, um, it's not a good. It's kind of a reversal of the kind of good state of things because I I feel, you know, we should be. It's what we sacrifice today, you know, for the generations after, for our children and for our children's children. That kind of is a more
yeah.
worthy thing
But of course,
than the alternative.
yeah. And well, you know what is I think that the lack of people having children is definitely one of the things to blame with for all that short-term thinking. People want life to be good now. They're too impatient to wait for it to be good for future generations.
Yeah, and it's also that
But also,
go on.
it is also, I believe, the irreligion is partially to blame. There's
Mm,
no belief in an afterlife. It's like, oh, if I'm not going to be rewarded for the, if the fruits of my labor shall not yield themselves in the afterlife,
mm.
then what's the point in doing good? Why not just do what is pleasant?
Let's enjoy what we have now. Yeah, and I suppose another part is that they're incentivized, you know, to do it due to the current kind of economic climates, you know, with interest rates going up at
Yes, and of
so
course
so
it's
pace
all terribly,
with
it's all about to
inflation.
come crashing down, because
Mm,
because of the food shortages, which are partially just because Ukraine isn't able to export anything, and Russia isn't allowed to export anything because of embargoes,
mm.
and that's not just the food that they would export; it's also the fertilizer that both of those countries, number one and number two exporters of fertilizer internationally is Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah,
You know, so like huge sections of Africa and and the Middle East and Central Asia are all about to, go ahead and starve basically because of soil poverty
mm. Well,
combined with the lack of necessary imports.
we've
And
made
well,
the
things aren't necessarily going to be all that great in the West because even
yeah,
though America grows most of the food that it needs, we don't produce most of our own fertilizer.
mm.
Purchase like nearly half of our fertilizer, I want to say, from Ukraine and Russia, which basically means that the food supply is going to go down by half at best.
Yeah, all caused by the all exacerbated by the EU sanctions and the European sanctions and US sanctions as we chuck billions of pounds and dollars towards this regime over in Eastern Europe.
Yeah, like what's it like? I realize that Russia is legitimately an evil country in numerous ways, but Ukraine strikes me as basically being about as bad. It's basically just small Russia.
Yeah, and you see it's been kind of fast tracked into the EU, don't you? And because it's apparently
Yeah.
liberal democratic state, but obviously it's completely a lie if you have if you spend a second trying to see what's been going on in Ukraine. I mean, he's effectively banned the opposition
Yeah.
parties and the and sort of
That's
dissident
normal
press.
for wartime, though. If
Yeah.
this was a legitimate war, I wouldn't particularly. Well, no, even the semi-illegitimate war that it is currently, I don't really have a problem with it, with banning opposition parties during a time of war. It's just that I don't think that America should care.
Mm.
Like we shouldn't treat Russia like such an enemy for innumerable reasons, one of which is just that we can't afford to.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, as much as I wish that we could afford to, as much as I wish that America was, some kind of fully autonomous hermit kingdom, we're not. We do depend hugely on all kinds of imports from around the world, including Russia.
Yeah.
Uh, but also, no, there's also partially just the fact that Russia isn't really our enemy in a deeply irreconcilable way, the way that, well, I would say that China is our true enemy, and China, though it is sort of friends with Russia at the moment, it strikes me as a very fair weather agreement, and if we were just able to get one of those on side, we could, if we got one of those two on side, we could easily make an alliance against the other. And, the way that I see Russia is like, yes, Russia's a rival for several important reasons, but,
Mm.
you
Yeah, I think
know, but,
we've made the monumental error as a civilization, and believing in infinite growth and kind of the end of war and all of these sorts of things. And well, I suppose linking it back to
yeah.
this whole passage, we kind of see that God will punish those civilizations which kind of have pride in their own existence and kind of think they're above basic human nature and flaws. And
Yeah.
these things will come crashing
Although
down.
it strikes me that this sort of what we might describe as primitive evil here is, well, hold on. Now, is the evil ever actually described? Or no, it's just in every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was evil continuously. So it's not really described. It might have been very similar to what we have today, or it might have been. I suppose the way
Mm.
it's been depicted in popular culture is more that it's sort of deeply violent. That there was just like war across the whole face of the earth
Mm.
in those days. But now that you mention it, I suppose it's like, well, it's not mentioned explicitly. It could have been a much more slothful kind of sin, like unto what we have today.
Mm. Well, of course, yeah, there's different ways in which that sin can be expressed, and you tend to find in the latter stages of empires that they kind of become, or at least certainly with the elites, they become sort of lazy and sort of decadent, but also prideful at the same time, kind of thinking they're so much so far more superior to the other kind of um, sort of states that are around them. But obviously it never ends well for them in the end. Like all things, they will wither away.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just that we have to live through it.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the
Just
unfortunate position of living through all this.
yeah.
What's it like? Never before have I understood. What's it? Never have I better understood the old Chinese curse of "May you live in interesting times" better than I do today. You know.
Yeah, and we happen to live in the decline rather than the rise, I suppose. But at the
Even
same,
if we're living in the rise, well, you know what is? Let me say this, and perhaps it's a slightly silly thought, but I'll let you be the judge of it. Decline and rise are not quite. It's not quite a dichotomy, you know. It's whenever one thing rises, another falls, and whenever one thing falls, another rises.
yeah, and
And well, like what's it like? We can what's it? It's true that we're living through the fall of the current regime or whatever. But I don't know. Maybe I'm being too optimistic, or maybe I'm being not optimistic at all. But it strikes me that, like, yes, something else is going to rise, possibly something worse, possibly something better, and we just can't tell what it is yet.
Mm. Well, we have, we can make guesses as to what will rise in its place. We see the whole wide sweeping changes that are happening to Europe, at least, in the US to a
Yes.
lesser extent.
Well, in America, in the U.S., the great sweeping changes which are happening are more sort of cultural.
Mm.
But the thing is, I would say that that always has been the most important aspect to America, or at least that's the way that America sort of evolved. That's sort of my main beef with Yiz is very much that well, I don't see America as being like an ethnically or racially distinguishable country in the way that most others are. I see it very much as being much more cultural and much more of a way of life. It's
Mm.
sort of a tribe with traditions and things that other people can be inducted into.
Well, if I were to push you a bit there, I know this is a Bible study, so we'll try and go back to the topic at hand. But um, are you not kind
But
of
I would say
repeating
that
the
what's yeah.
are you not kind of repeating the same error and thinking that the US is sort of devoid of all kind of racial politics and divides?
Well, I'm not saying that it is devoid of racial politics. I'm saying
Mm.
that racial politics are sort of a wicked subversion.
Yeah.
Oh, it's like America's full of racial politics. I would say that's possibly one of the largest problems in America. I would say that the racial makeup of America is not an essential aspect of it. You could have a good America that was mostly black or mostly Asian or mostly anything, because that's not where the character of the country comes from. The character of the country is almost purely ideological and cultural. That's the reason why cultural and ideological subversion is sort of it's more galling than genetic subversion.
Are but our cultural and political expressions somewhat derived to an extent by um, the genetics? I'm not saying I believe in this. I'm just kind of being
I'd
devil's
say they're
advocate at the
derived from
moment.
the genetics of the people that develop them. Like any culture on Earth, or not culture, no, any genetic stock of people can adopt just about any idea from any other people on Earth.
Mm.
But the what we might call the creative aspect, the generative aspect, is I would admit is possibly more genetic.
Mm.
There's a reason why most African culture is sort of too dynamic and too chaotic, and you do have great empires in Africa, but they don't last very long. They last for the empire of the one guy that founded or they last for the lifetime of the founder, and then they immediately collapse into squabbling. Whereas in China and Japan, whereas in East Asia, you get really stagnant empires that last for nearly 1,000 years, but they don't hardly change at all.
Mm.
But then you get Europeans and eventually Americans who are sort of able to find a good middle ground where you can make reasonable innovation and progress without completely destroying what came before.
Mm.
You're able to sort of respect the past without letting it hold you back, and you're able to move towards the future without abandoning the precious treasures of our ancestors.
Well, I suppose linking that to this passage, how can we relate that to the Ark story and the kind of God's punishment?
Well, hmm, I don't particularly know. I feel like we've worked ourselves into. Well, it's a good tangent, and I'm glad that we talked about it, but I feel we've worked ourselves completely away from the topic of the video.
Mm.
Can you think of anything? Because I sort of can't.
I think I've already made my main point with the Ark, in terms of linking it to our current time. Um, with the prideful and sort of privileged and thinking.
And
sort of
we're about to
corrupted.
get our just desserts.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Well, shall we move on to the next
Yes.
passage then?
Oh yes, the next chapter, I suppose. And what I suppose
Yes.
I ought to read this one, since you
Yeah.
read the last one.
Okay.
All right. Noah's family and various beasts and fowl enter the ark. The flood comes, and the waters cover the whole earth. All other life that breathes is destroyed. And the Lord said unto Noah, Come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. Every clean beast shalt thou take by thee take thee by sevens, male and his female, and of beasts that are not clean by two, the male and his female. The fowls also of the air by sevens, the male and his female. Keep seed alive upon the face of the earth. Yet 7 days I will cause the rain upon the earth, 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance that I have made I will destroy from the face of the earth. And Noah did according to all the Lord had commanded him. And Noah was 600 years old when the flood of the waters was upon the earth. And Noah went in, and his sons, and his wife, and his sons' wives with him, into the ark, because of the waters of the flood, of clean beasts, and beasts that are not clean, and of fowls, and of everything that creepeth upon the earth. And there went in 2 and 2 unto Noah into the ark, the male and his female, as God had commanded Noah. And it came to pass after 7 days, the waters of the flood were upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day, were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. Remember that sort of air bubble conception that I told you about?
Mm.
Yes, the way that ancient people perceived the Earth,
Yeah.
sort of a flat disk in the middle of a big bubble of air, surrounded on all sides by water.
Mm.
And the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. In the selfsame day entered Noah, and Shem, and Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them, into the ark. And they, and every beast of his kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and every fowl after his kind, every bird of every sort. And they went into Noah, into the ark, 2 and 2 of all flesh, wherein there is breath of life. And they that went in male and female of all flesh, as God had commanded him. The Lord shut him in. And the flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased, and bare up the ark, and it was lift up above the earth. And the waters prevailed, and were increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark went upon the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. And all flesh died that moved upon the earth, both fowl, and of cattle, and of beast, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man. All in whose nostrils was the breath of life, all that was in the dry land, died. And every living substance was destroyed which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle, and creeping things, and the fowl of heaven, and they were destroyed from the earth. Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days.
There we go.
Yes. What were your thoughts of that?
Um, I think one of the things that popped into my mind was the overall kind of sentiment of this, and kind of the true sort of extent that all these kind of creatures have been wiped out by this great flood that has gone on. It does make you think that the kind of modern conception of God and of Christ being kind of completely peace-loving and passive and, you know, unwilling to kind of act if for morality, and just kind of very submissive, I think, is the best way to describe it. It's kind of challenged quite a lot by the whole, by the
Well,
Old Testament as a whole, most especially
I
this.
suppose that is sort of, well, that's the entire point. That's why the two books are together in one. It's because, it's sort of a yin yang thing.
Mm,
You gotta have the harsh and the justice and the, what's it? Even a house built of wood requires a foundation of stone.
yeah,
You know, uh,
I mean, even in the New Testament, we see
uh,
Jesus, turning over the tables of the moneylenders, and he doesn't exactly, he doesn't act submissive. I mean, his whole life is in
he
sort of
was not
reaction.
submissive. He was pacifistic, perhaps,
Mm.
but not submissive.
He was a dissident, pretty much through the whole thing, and obviously that ended up costing his life.
Yes. Well, yes, but that was rather the whole point of it, wasn't it?
Mm.
Like everything according to plan.
Mhm. Yeah. Did you have any thoughts on this?
Uh, yeah, and well, the thing is well, speaking of, that sort of does remind me of like something in my church's theology that is rather perhaps slightly different from other churches is that like I've said before about like God and Jesus being two incredibly what's it not incredibly two completely distinct and separate entities. Uh, well, uh, I'm not sure how much of this is like solid doctrine and how much of this is just what my seminary teachers like personal philosophy. But what I was taught when I was in seminary as a 15-year-old boy was that back when I was like 4 years ago now, is that the God of the Old Testament is basically premortal Jesus. It is Jesus in spiritual form before he was born.
Mm.
Whereas like God the Father is more sort of in the background, sort of just observing things and like occasionally advising Jesus is like, oh, that's not quite right. It'd be better if you did this thing. And that's also sort of the reason why some of the Old Testament prophets are occasionally able to bargain with God and convince him to do something different from his initial plan. It is because, well, it was not big G God that was doing most of those things. It was actually Jehovah being, well, it was actually Jesus sort of in spiritual form and not God the Father, because God the Father, would be perfect and therefore would not need or allow humans to sort of negotiate with him. Whereas Jesus, that would be something more to happen with him, especially before he got his body. But I don't know. That's maybe just a bit of an
Well,
anecdote. I don't know how much value that is to you.
no, that's fine. I mean, how would you balance that with the idea of God being, infinitely powerful? How can that be possible? If there are three of them.
Well, I don't believe that that's actually in our theology that God is omnipotent.
Mm.
I believe we do believe that he is the most powerful entity in the universe. The he contains the maximum possible amount of power that any being can have, and that it's rather incomprehensible by human understanding. But there's a big difference between between too numerous to count and infinite.
Yeah.
There's a difference between well, I suppose it's the difference between a giant squid and Cthulhu, isn't it?
Mm. So do you think
Uh,
so is the theology that they have kind of different, I don't know, different levels of power, or are they all sort of roughly
well,
equal?
Jesus and God now are both equal because Jesus has a body now,
Yeah.
after being born and resurrected and all that, whereas God had a body from the beginning. So they're both sort of like roughly equal in power as gods now, but God, like the Father, Heavenly Father, is still supreme because he's the Father, because he is superior in authority, even though he is equal in power to Jesus. He is superior in authority because he created Jesus.
Mm. Well,
Do you suppose that makes sense?
I can see the reasoning from your from your theology, I suppose. It's um I forgot what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Oh, it'll come back to me. If there's anything else, other
All
things
right.
you want to mention.
Uh, well, I suppose I brought it up last time with the when we were talking about it earlier in the week was
Oh yeah, it's come back to me now. But carry on.
oh yeah, well no, go ahead. You mentioned what you were gonna say
Well,
before
it's
you forget it again.
yeah. Well, you mentioned the fact that it was when the Son was given, or when Jesus was given a body, that he became powerful. It's interesting because
Well,
they
after he
knew.
was resurrected, to be specific.
Mm, but you're kind of conflating having a body with having power. Is that kind of is that how you would view it?
Um, I don't know that I would say that it's like conflating a body with having power, because we also believe that, Jesus being Jehovah, being the God of the Old Testament, whereas Heavenly Father is a slightly separate entity that is mostly mentioned in the New Testament, because
Mm,
Jesus, is always talking about his Father. Uh, I suppose the thing that but Jesus being the God of the Old Testament, without a body, he was still able to do all the great stuff, building the universe, etc.
mm,
Uh, so presumably, I was, yeah, so presumably is what's it like even without a body, the power of Christ is, near incomprehensible for a human being. But I'd say that, yeah, it's definitely a bit of a level up to be like after getting a body and being resurrected. Uh, I
mm.
suppose what I would say is that, like, well, you know how making AI is difficult because basically you can't just make an artificial mind. You have to make like an artificial body for the mind to operate as well because you can't have infinity without a finite perspective or something like that.
Yeah.
Again, this is another one of my many Jordan Petersonisms, and it might be a slightly dated fact today, but one of the reasons why making AI is really difficult is because you can't just make like a computer like cloud of consciousness in the computer. You have to like simulate a body and sort of a brain in various ways in order to make anything like remotely, in order to make a machine that thinks in a remotely rational manner.
Yeah. If that's even possible.
And so I imagine it's probably the same way with divine entities. Is there probably is some important reason why God has a body and always has had a body, and why Christ had to get a body, and well, to be quite frank, why we all had to get bodies as well, because in my church's sort of theology, the soul of every human being was created even before the earth was created. We've been existing sort of as spirits for ages and ages, for
Mm.
multiple billions of years, even longer than the earth. So presumably there's a really important reason why God created the whole universe and earth and stuff, just so that we could get these physical bodies. Presumably it's like a major level up.
Yeah, I would think Jesus getting a body um, was actually a kind of a struggle in and of itself because
Well,
you're
becoming
subject
mortal
to
is the struggle,
you're
yes.
subject to
But of
temptation, you're
course,
subject to sort of struggle and that sort of endure the things that the body kind of
yeah,
makes you
so
need to deal
perhaps
with.
we've had a bit of a misunderstanding. When I was referring to the level up and the like God having a body and that sort of thing, I was talking about the resurrection, about the perfect immortal
Mm.
body.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so like yeah, Christ did come here to struggle and become weak and small when he got his mortal body. Yeah, when he was born. He was resurrected after that, and he got his immortal
Yeah.
body, his perfect body. And we're all gonna get that eventually too, so man.
Yeah. Um, I think another thing I would like to mention with this um chapter is only a very very minor thing. What's a qubit? How any rough idea of what that is?
I'll have to Google that. Like, what
Mm.
wasn't Goliath like 3 cubits?
Mm. There must be
I
some
forget.
sort of you know
Well, I
translator for
believe, you
that.
know what? I believe that we don't actually know because I believe that a cubit was like a certain kind of arm span.
Mm.
So it's a subjective measurement. So, we don't know how long a cubit was because we don't know how tall people were back then.
Yeah, that's true.
Like what's it like one of those things like Goliath, if you take a cubit based off of a modern person's body measurements, if you take a cubit based off of the arm span of a modern human, Goliath ends up being about 9 feet tall.
Yeah.
When you take a cubit based off of the average, like say an ancient Egyptian person, for instance, from like 5,000 years ago, back when they were all about 4 feet tall, end up with Goliath being closer to 6 feet tall.
Mm.
uh, which is still quite enormous. Like if David and most of the people in Israel were only about 4 foot tall, and Goliath was about 6.5 feet tall, it's still rather giant.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to be facing up that sort of up against that person in a fight. I'd imagine.
Yes, I am googling cubit right now though. So a
Okay.
cubit. The cubit is an ancient unit of length based on the distance from the elbow to the middle finger.
Okay.
Uh-huh. Primarily associated with Sumerians, Egyptians, and Israelites. The term cubit is found in the Bible regarding Noah's Ark, the Covenant Tabernacle, Solomon's Temple, and Solomon's Temple. The common cubit was divided into 6 palms, 4 fingers, 24 digits. Royal cubits added a palm for 7 palms times 4 fingers, etc. Okay.
Mm. So the lengths
Uh,
typically
so
ranged
so
from 44.4 to 53 centimeters, or 1.1.5 to 1.7 to 1 and 3/4 feet. 1 and 3/4 feet. So there you go.
yeah, so also is what's something that might interest some of the oh gosh, first I was quoting Jordan Peterson. Now I'm about to quote Joe Rogan. In case you can't tell, I'm something of a basic bitch as far as internet conservatives go.
I'm sure you have. If there's like a sort of AA watcher
I do
tuning
have
in.
spicy opinions, but even my spicy opinions are like kind of like they're almost not what's it like my most spicy opinion regarding race. Have I told you about it before?
No, go on. Oh, is that the
Basically,
mixed
I think
race? that everyone should.
Yeah. No, it's yeah. Basically, I think that like race mixing should be like mandatory for like 2 or 3 generations until America is like completely homogenous. Basically, so that we can get past all these petty race politics and focus on what really matters. Things like xenophobia, so that we can just be like really bigoted against foreigners.
I mean, the only I would say the thing you're the most, what was it, based on is probably the gays.
What the only thing that who isn't based on?
No, you're the most based on.
The most based on? Absolutely. Absolutely. I am what's it like the only country that what's it like the only what's it I don't want to say anything to get me banned
Yeah.
on YouTube, but
Right, well,
let's
no,
just say that
tread carefully.
I'm only slightly less homophobic than Saudi Arabia. I'll put it that way. Which is somewhat terribly ironic, because Mr. D is definitely my favorite person in the AA crew.
Mm, but that's despite rather than because of.
Well, no, frankly, it's because he calls out his own. He's like, "Oh, it's a terrible sin. I know, etc." You know, it's because he admits it in a way that is just sort of nice and honest.
Mm.
Like, yeah, if every gay person was like Mr. D, I I wouldn't have any problem. But they're not,
So it's a problem
so
with.
Saudi Arabia looks shockingly reasonable.
It's the way in which homosexuality is practiced rather than gayness itself. That's
Well, okay, so here's a sort of a sure. I'm not sure if this is actually a meme somewhere, or if this is my own sort of crackpot concoction, but basically just like a thought that I've had occasionally is like, well, the terrible thing is not so much men having sex with men, so much as men not having sex with women.
yeah. I see the reasoning.
Is like yeah, like if it was like ancient Greece where like just everyone is basically bisexual, I wouldn't really mind. That's not what's happening.
No.
That's not what they're trying to do.
Well, it's trying.
It's like
It's a deliberate attempt to invert the natural order of things.
yeah.
Well,
Uh,
in an attempt to undermine, um, men and women, kind of, and sort of the natural sort of traditions and culture that have sort of maintained Western civilization for thousands of years, probably. Since the fall of
yeah.
Rome.
Yeah.
Um,
It,
Go on.
it is just chronically depressing.
Well, it shouldn't. We
Uh,
shouldn't fall into despair. We should just accept the fact that these things exist and try and do our utmost to stand against that.
yeah.
Stand apart from it,
Uh,
and perhaps
oh gosh, no, I just thought of it. Here's another based take, though, that you might agree with. No, well, another slightly spicy opinion that I have on the race subject topic or whatever is basically feel that the Irish corrupted black people.
okay.
Well, not just the Irish, sort of North FC as well. Basically, is just well, maybe it's not necessarily spicy,
Well,
but
the Irish corrupted North FC,
the
so
Irish are the real N words. That would be a more spicy way of putting it.
okay. Yeah, well, it's interesting you said about
Uh,
North FC as well, because I would say the Irish corrupted North FC. Liverpool and
it's all the same thing, isn't it? It's all the Celtic people in the UK. What's it like? The only high IQ Celts that I'm aware of is the Scots, and only marginally.
not like us Anglo-Saxon Southerners.
Yeah, no, the Anglo-Saxon Southerners is like, oh, yeah, you're the most civilized little barbarians on that island. That's what I'll say.
The bar's quite low though.
Yeah, what's it like when you're competing with the Irish? The bar for civilization is
And the
incredibly
Scots.
low. Yeah. Well, at least the Scots built a few decent colleges.
Yeah,
That's a stretch better than the Irish.
yeah, that's true.
Anyway, no, but the reason why I say that is well, basically because it is rather true. Like when you look at like a lot of stuff in Black American culture, none of it comes from Africa. It all basically comes from not just from Europe, but it comes from like old Anglo-Saxon. You know, like the custom of jumping over a broom in a black wedding in America.
Mm,
That comes from an ancient Anglo-Saxon pagan ritual. It's actually that comes from Druids.
yeah,
Basically, what happened is the sort of the North FC type people and the Irish who settled in the southern United States, the what you might call the cracker population, the poor whites that make up the majority of that region, preserved a bunch of these old Anglo-Saxon practices and sort of druidic practices. And that sort of got passed on to the blacks because the blacks were sort of sitting next to them in what's it? They wallowed together in their poverty. That's a good way of putting it.
yeah,
And you know, like even like the culture, the sort of culture of like not getting married terribly often and having like, a lot of like baby mamas and things, and even just being a bit of a fast life history strategist. You know, spending too much money on food and clothing and not saving the way that you should, like all that sort of thing.
mm,
What's it like? Those sorts of problems were existed among white Southerners long before they existed among, well, not long, but sort of before they existed among black Americans.
or many black Americans, I suppose, wouldn't have had the chance to being slaves.
Oh, yeah, and after they were emancipated, you know, what did they do? They copied their neighbors, and that's sort of where the sort of modern poverty, etc.,
Oh no, don't
and
tread carefully again.
well, yeah, what's it? That's where the sort of what's it? Thug culture and all that sort of thing. You know, what's it like? A lot of the first gangs in America were Irish, you know. And
Mm,
well, if we look at the majority of gangs today, it's the neighbors of the Irish, isn't it?
mm. Well, and the Irish
And
tend
what's
to
it like?
they didn't have a very good reputation when moving over to England after the potato famines.
Well, the terribly ironic thing with that is like what's it like? Irish people who moved to England had more sort of rights and freedoms in England than they did in their native Ireland. That's the
Yeah,
sort of silly
yeah,
thing, you know. Like if you're gonna make these people serfs, I would presume you would make them serfs everywhere, not just serfs in their home country.
mm,
You know, because the Irish were sort of like enslaved for a long time, borderline, you know, enslaved for quite a while. So, yeah.
well, since about sort of 1200-ish with the
Yeah.
English. Well, I unfortunately have to leave you in about
Oh, yes, I
five.
understand it. Gosh, we
No, this is fine.
yeah,
About
we
5 10 minutes.
completely worked our way.
Um,
Okay, so I suppose we better work the conversation into something a bit better. Uh, Anything else you'd like to say about the Bible before we leave?
yeah, I mean, one extra thing I'd talk about for Genesis 7 is probably something to do with the idea going on from what I was saying about kind of God punishing is of
Ah,
providence and um,
ah,
how much you can tell.
fortune.
How can we, what signs in this world can we tell of, if there are any, of kind of God's will, and what should we learn from them?
I think you have to be careful with that. You know, in the
Mm,
New Testament it says, you know, I shall reign and I shall shine upon the righteous and the wicked both, you know.
mm,
So I think you do have to be a bit careful with that.
yeah. I
Uh,
think with providence as well, we need to kind of realise that it's actually the faithful who will suffer the most in a way. It's not just the if you're
yeah, because God doesn't have to worry about them. He allows them to suffer because he knows that
mm,
they're going to stick by him, you know, like Job.
yeah, and it's in part a test, isn't it?
Uh, Um, Yeah, I'd say that's definitely true. Plus, not to mention is well, the pride cycle is something else. You know, it's like even when God does bless people for being righteous, sort of inevitably they end up like as soon as they get prosperity and gold and riches and things,
Mm,
what do they do? They sort of they abandon him and they say, "Oh, we earned this by our own merits." So then, he abandons them and he allows them to suffer. And then, he doesn't return to them until they return to him.
mm. You can kind of
Yeah.
one of the most common sort of people who believed in Providence was none other than Oliver Cromwell, and he
Mm.
scored several sort of huge victories with his New Model Army during the 1640s, and then it was
Yes, and that's quite true, but it didn't last now, did it?
no,
So
it
is
didn't.
that
No,
because of
and
that
what
because of some sin on his part, or is that because it was no good to begin with?
what it was well Providence, funny enough, was sort of a major decider of his policy during the 1650s because it was during his invasion of sort of the Spanish West Indies and seizing
Mm.
Jamaica, which he kind of thought the tide was turning, something was going wrong. I'm not serving God's will as best I can, and yeah, you kind of think is that you can understand his reasoning, but you also think Providence is he's relying too much on Providence for his own governance.
Yeah. Also, yeah, that is rather true, I do think. Yeah. Suppose. I don't
Because
want to completely drift away from this gospel conversation, but I was just thinking, it's like, what? Oh yes, no. I suppose it's like final thoughts. What is that? All your final thoughts, or is
yeah,
there
I would
more?
say so. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So I suppose my final thoughts is yeah, I rather agree with that. Uh, mm,
Oh, I would
but
also sorry
also I
one.
would say is that well, oh yes, but I just remember a thing. To sort of reframe my previous statement of like mandatory race mixing, whatever, to make it perhaps a little bit more understandable for Europeans, is that what I'm proposing is something. What's it like? I understand that you want to have low immigration, but when immigration must be allowed to happen, I'd basically make it mandatory that like what's it like only single young adults are allowed to immigrate into the country. They have to marry a native-born single young adult, and they're not allowed to vote or anything until they've had at least three children together. That's more that's one sort of potential policy that I have sort of been thinking about, and it's like, yeah, that feels right.
It
What do you
was
think, Englander?
it would certainly support integration, wouldn't it? Um,
Eh.
but you can kind of but whether that would be very feasible is another question.
Well, like,
It would certainly drive down the migration rates. I could give you that.
uh, I suppose that's the thing. It's like if this is something that had been done to begin with, it would have never become a problem because,
Mm,
well, because like older folks and married folks and stuff like they would have known there was no chance. So they would have never come here to begin with, or well, they would have never come to the UK to begin with. Uh, no. With America, of course, things are a little bit different because Latinos kind of are just Americans that speak Spanish.
mm,
So there is a legitimate argument to be made that they should be allowed into the country. Well, that combined with the fact that they're very similar to Italians in that they're very hardworking, they tend to save money, and they tend to integrate very well. Within less than four generations.
mm.
Uh, Although that's sort of ironically the problem with Latinos as well, is what's you've got some sort of mumblings of a pro-immigration sort of sentiment within certain sections of the American right. But the only problem with that is that the Latinos, because they become completely integrated within like a few generations, even if you did allow a huge influx of like Mexicans, let's say, in order to try and increase Republican voting, that would only really work for that one generation because their children, and as soon as all those people have children that are born into the country, uh, you know, those children are going to, adopt the local zeitgeist. And if the zeitgeist is left wing, you know, although, those children will basically abandon the traditions of their forefathers, they're going to adapt to the local culture. And if the local culture is left wing, uh, you know,
Well, I guess
that you sort of doomed yourself.
if you expose them to enough, I don't know, sort of lies and delusions in education and I don't know, weed and all sorts of um, sort of substitutes for um, genuinely decent things. I suppose you probably could. You can make left
Yeah,
wingers
well,
out of
it's not
everyone.
even just it's not even just that. Oh, I suppose you could. It's that that's what actually happens.
Mm,
The majority of so-called Latinos in America can't even speak Spanish because that's how well integrated they are.
yeah.
Because they're like third or fourth generation.
Mm.
So that's a thing.
Well, those your final
So like,
thoughts then?
yeah, final thoughts. Okay, final thoughts is what's it? The Bible is good, lovely, and wholesome, and we both enjoy reading it quite a lot. Modern people are very vain and very wicked, and we will soon suffer the consequences of that if we are not already. And Irish are the real N-words.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah, yeah. I feel like yeah, that's a
a wonderful place to end.
a lovely comedic place to end, and I'm allowed to say that also because I'm like an eighth Irish or something. I don't know, some of my ancestors. I'm American and I'm white. Like the chances of me not being partially Irish are damn near zero.
I'm sure if you did an ancestry test, you probably get some Irish in you.
Yeah,